my friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am Mr. East Forest. This week I have a conversation with Dr. Dan Engle. He's back on the show, which we're very happy about. He is a doctor, a psychiatrist with a clinical practice that combines aspects of regenerative medicine, psychedelic research, integrative spirituality, and peak performance, as it says on his website. But he actually just opened Kuya Institute for Transformational Medicine in Austin, Texas, which is pretty cool. And we talk a lot about that and what they're doing there on the show. And he's got several other things going on. He says a book that came out called A Dose of Hope, which is really cool. That one focuses on MDMA as a therapeutic tool in a clinical practice. And that's something that we basically get into the ins and outs of because it's such an emerging field and there's lots to discuss. And I love talking about it with people who are on the ground level and out there doing it. So before we do that, I just want to say thanks to everyone who's here, especially our council members. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so by joining our council on Patreon. It's patreon.com/eastforest. We do all sorts of fun things there. I'd like to welcome Sarah and Greg, who recently signed up. I'm trying to think. Last I shared on that, like a meditation that I found from 10 years ago. It was a musical thing I did out in Portland. So that's a place I got to share that music that I don't do anywhere else. And we also shared an advanced look at the Live in Brooklyn EP that just came out. I sent it over to our council members early, and I'll play one of those tracks at the end of this podcast. So thank you to everyone who supports the East Forest work and the podcast on our Patreon. I will be in Denver on April 20th, which is supposedly a holiday known as 420. That's how that one panned out. I'm really excited to come back and do a full-blown ceremony concert. And I think just a couple tickets left for Dublin on April 9th. And London is sold out on April 6th, I believe. But we hopefully will be back in the fall, God willing. And we're working on our dear friends in Australia and lots of other things coming up in the United States. So get on the mailer if you'd like to stay in the know. And that's at eastforest.org or, social media if that's your thing. We do make posts there if you see them about shows that are coming up in your area, East Forest and East Forest Music. Also on March 11th, we'll be doing another Journey Space event. And this one, again, I will be premiering another new 4-hour journey guidance music piece. This is like Music for Mushrooms, but this one is new. So if you want to hear it, that's the only place you can hear it. Check it out at journeyspace.com. That's an online virtual event. We'll also be at the Tree Fort Fest. That is the end of March. I'll be doing a ceremony concert there as well as playing for Yoga Fort. So I'm excited about that. The world's always crazy tumultuous, but right now as I'm recording this, we're dealing with sort of the aggression in Ukraine, which is deeply disappointing. I personally have a connection to Ukraine over the years that was sort of ongoing throughout my adolescence and upbringing. Everything from a Ukrainian exchange student, Sergey, that became my dear friend and that lived with us for a while, to myself learning Russian in high school and then going over to Russia for part of my master's degree. That's actually where I got it from, technically, at the Moscow Art Theater. So, that whole region is something I felt a connection to, and it's totally heartbreaking what's going on. It's disturbing. So I don't know what else to say about it, other than it's touching me deeply, and I'm sure it is for a lot of y'all as well too. And there's so much going on. So if anything, it's increasing our need to have that inner resilience and understanding our true north personally, so that we can face these challenges in the world with clarity and grace. On that note, talking about ways to do that, that's something we get into, essentially, in this conversation. Let's dive into it. Let's get into this conversation with our old friend, Dr. Dan Engle. It's good to see you, my friend. I kind of think I have the same sweater and I almost thought about wearing it today.
That
That
would
would
have
have
been
been
really good.
hilarious. Yeah. So you moved
Hmm.
away from
Yeah.
Portland a while ago, right? You're in Austin because I was out there, and when I was at On It last time doing Aubrey's
Hmm.
podcast, I saw your
Kuya.
new business next door.
Thanks, man. It's been
Yeah.
a beautiful labor of love, and excited to finally see her out in the world.
I bet. Yeah. So how long's that been open, and what are you all up to there?
We have been open right about 4 months, and we offer what I would describe as transformational medicine. So it's a bit of the combination of hardware sciences and software sciences. So performance medicine, regenerative medicine, in the same kind of like up-leveled functional medicine into a bit more individualized performance orientation, neuromodulation with that kind of orientation to like functional neurologic and mental capacity being up-leveled.
Mm-hmm.
Hardware sciences, software sciences on the side of like mind, along the deeper aspects of mind, subconscious material, bringing it into the light of awareness, core traumas, the relational aspect of the heart, and then the soul. And the soul being that aspect of psychedelic therapy that allows the soul to speak.
So, aside from the functional medicine stuff, are you doing are you doing ketamine therapy? I've heard. I'm sort of saying this to help the listener know, but you're doing
Totally.
ketamine therapy. But what? Tell me about like the stuff that works with the soul there, or how you see that,
Yeah.
or sort of everything do that.
Yeah, for sure. So ketamine therapy, I'd put in both of those camps. It's a hardware technology and a software technology because it's really good neurologically and it's really good psychologically. And if we're talking about aspects of the soul, I would describe this whole process that we're in the midst of, this like combination of hardware and software sciences. Formally, I would describe that as transformational medicine. But the approach and how it's practiced is as a soul-centered therapy. The soul being that part of our lives that animates us into the world and was the blueprint that we came in with when we were born, and that aspect of ourself that's always orienting towards our highest good and our greatest fulfillment. Sometimes it's a little hard to listen because the ego gets in the way. And psychedelic therapies, which ketamine is classically not a psychedelic, it's more of a dissociative. But when we use it in a psycholytic process, and that's how we do ketamine differently than most other centers, is you can actually start to engender this altered state of consciousness and surf the realm between full lucidity, day to day, kind of just walking around the streets, and then like dream state anesthesia, which ketamine can get you to. We're surfing the sweet spot in the middle. So a person has an altered state, they're able to engage the ketamine experience as this doorway into the subconscious, and then we can use that to see what's deeper into that aspect of soul.
So you're doing it in a sort of psychotherapy format with therapy involved, or is it more just the medicine on its own? Because I know a lot of centers, it's mostly focused on delivering the medicine itself,
Right.
and not as many are where the actual center delivering medicine is also offering some kind of therapy at the same time, or even it's usually separate.
Yeah. Yeah. Ours is that way. We're heavily oriented towards the psychotherapeutic process because we want to help people wake up and not just go to sleep. And it's not to make that approach to ketamine therapy wrong, because IV ketamine therapy, when you use high doses and you essentially put people into a close to anesthetic kind of arena, or at least a deep sleep state, oftentimes people will wake up and feel renewed, but there's not any material to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more convenient because you can have people have typically a net positive experience, and you don't have to deal with all the trauma underneath, right? So it's kind of convenient. It's a really easy model. You can have a big group room with other people going through a similar experience. And if you use lighter dose, IV can be done that way too, lighter dose, or injection.
Yeah.
Then you're surfing this sweet spot where the person can actually engage consciously in their process. And we have a really sweet medicine music journey suite that we
Oh, Oh, do you?
Yeah,
I'll have to ask.
Parongi and Amani, guys that you know really well, worked with us to script this suite of medicine music specifically for ketamine sessions. And we have 4 albums that we put people through this deep transpersonal process of the arc of a transformational experience. So it has a beginning, middle, and end, kind of like a journey would do,
How long are they?
right at an hour.
An hour. Did I tell you about Journey Space? This I'm making music basically for this, but it's sort of like it's an interesting whole for me. How a lot of you're a bit unusual, and that a lot of centers and a lot of therapists, and certainly even in the larger, broader conversation of the psychedelic revolution, isn't talking so much about the experience itself, and maybe how that relates to music and ceremony and ritual as part of that.
Mm-hmm.
We're thinking a lot about legality and somewhat access and effectiveness,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not thinking so much about the experience. And for me, it's largely driven by music and guided by music and the actual experience, often, not always. And so people have been using my music, but I wanted to find a way to create more and offer like more specific tools, kind of like what you're talking about, what they made,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot more of it and more. It's sort of like an exclusive little library that's always growing.
Mm-hmm.
We can bring in other artists as well, but to be used as a tool. You
Absolutely.
just press play, and it takes someone through the whole thing from beginning to end. Because I think a lot of places, unlike yourself, they don't have any. Maybe they don't even know. Like, I don't know. I want to get into this. I want to help people, but I don't really know how to guide the actual experience.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an easier way to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and it's great that you're in this arena, man. I figured you were. I haven't. It's been a while since you and I spoke last, so I figured
Yeah.
since we had spoken last, you were in this. I knew you were already in this arena, but I didn't know you were specifically lacing music for ketamine journeys. And ketamine's unique. It's a unique molecule. Historically, it's not been my favorite psychedelic or altered state tool to work with. My background is in ayahuasca and San Pedro. And I saw ketamine as this synthetic dissociative, and like, why would I want to use that?
That's what I thought too. Yeah. Yeah. I had the same feeling.
And then when I recognized that's a pretty strong prejudice and bias, and what's that about? And can I give it a test drive, and can I just see what's here? Because
Yeah.
all medicine has their place at the table when we know when to use them for a given person at which time in the larger suite of everything else they're doing. And when MDMA and psilocybin become legal, like how do we know when to use each of those? That's the skill and the alchemy that's rising through all of this work.
Yeah.
And the music suite, in my experience with ketamine, is the most important with that medicine, because with ketamine you're really locked in and you're so deep. With most other medicines you're out and it's a more interactive landscape, but with ketamine you're really internal, and the music's kind of in a way all you have, especially if you're blindfolded.
Preaching to the choir. Yeah. I mean, I'm from the psilocybin space. That's what informed my music and my work, my creativity. And my partner, Rada, started leading ketamine at a ketamine clinic here in Boise and doing small group sessions. So I had that's the reason I had a first row seat to it, because I actually joined the group, and then she was doing these multiple times a week. So I had a great testing ground for music I was working on for psilocybin guidance. But it turns out if I did small changes, it worked extremely well for her sessions. And we had a lot of real world testing to do. So I'll get you some access to Journey Space. We're launching it really soon in beta, and you can try it out, see what you think.
Cool. Yeah, man. Happy to.
But yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about this music and ceremony aspect. What are you finding are ways that we can bring in elements of ritual or ceremony that makes sense to the broadest group of people? Sort of it's appreciation, hopefully without too much appropriation, but still, mostly it's about being effective, as opposed to just saying nothing. Like, we're coming in, here's your medicine. Hey, I'm here for you if you need me. Here's some music. Have you found anything has been really key or not?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for asking the question, because it is an intentional process of getting in touch with the deepest aspects of ourselves. And that's
very vulnerable.
That's very vulnerable. A high degree of opportunity for personal discovery. And that's every bit of an intention that we take into any other ceremony. Like, help me open up to the greatest aspect of my own being, help me understand and see the things that I'm not able to see on my own. Help me to open up into a vulnerable space if I trust my facilitation, trust that guidance, to unlock areas that I'm not able to access on my own. I mean, this is deep work, and that's why I would call this soul work. And ketamine can do that. All medicines can do that, and altered states can do that. And there are a lot of ways to engage in altered state of consciousness outside of the day-to-day ego kind of construct. And so when we bring in intention, like you're describing, I typically am pretty front and center with what I believe is opening up into these deeper waters and greater landscapes, this aspect of soul. And we don't talk about soul, and even our just common languaging much these days. It's changing more. It's changing quickly, which is helpful. And particularly in medicine, we don't talk about soul at all.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like almost,
Soul has baggage. Yeah,
it does.
Pun intended.
Totally. And yet, when we look at all of the ancient medical traditions that have stood the test of time, they each had a conversation and some kind of discussion about the importance of engaging the aspect of soul. And so we're reclaiming that. That's what Kuya stands for. That's what our kind of medicine, consciousness, personal development process stands for. So I'm typically onboarding people with that conversation of being able to open up in trust and transparency and in faith and availability to these deeper waters. And let's get radically curious, as we're going to allow the ego to softly step aside and then see what wants to be revealed. And however a person chooses to bring in their own prayer, their own intention, but also that has more of a reverential component. Sometimes it's religious based, sometimes it's non-denomination spirituality, sometimes it's simply a desire to be in touch with something greater than the known kind of self, the small self. And then with that kind of intention, now we've created ceremony. And once we create ceremony, we start lacing it with a little bit of ritual. And that might be lighting of a candle, setting that intention before receiving the medicine. I'm always offering a mantra and a prayer we do IM sessions. In our clinic, find that the I am works really well because it gives a deep reset to that default mode network where the ego lives. And a pretty
yes, it can. I only laugh because I got destroyed by my first I am, and I was like, whatever. I've mentioned it many times on the podcast, but it can be quite powerful. Yeah. And fast.
Yeah, and fast and deep and strong. So there's a sweet spot in the dosing, which you're talking about.
Now I know. Yeah.
Right. And so when we're offering the medicine and we're praying it up, so to speak, like we would pray medicine up in any ceremony, then now you have these aspects of ritual that don't necessarily have to be the exact calling in of the four directions, or dusting off with sage or palo santo, or a variety of other ceremony, like typical ceremonial practices and ritualistic practices that I'm familiar with, and is kind of the earliest stage of my training in these more like shamanic arts, so to speak. But I found that if we bring in some of these just basic elements, and it can be as simple as honoring the basic 4 to 5 elements in our own psyche: earth, water, air, fire. And our psychotherapeutic rooms have each of those elements. We've laced all 5 of our therapy rooms to be elemental in that regard. So we have an earth room, a fire room, a water room, an ether room, etc. So when we're honoring those elemental forces, now we're creating ritual and we're creating ceremony. So I think your point's a really good one. And that's this acceleration of medicine today, where we're bringing these ancient wisdom traditions and we're giving them a contemporary flavor that's not too rigid and denominational, and people can still put their own influence in their own voice and their own like power behind it.
Well, I think that's important that anyone can bring in what's relevant, important, their own history if they have any they're connected with.
Mm.
So it's a little bit more of an open canvas, a little bit of paint by numbers. It's like, well, we have these different colors, and you can kind of do whatever you like in here too as an invitation. Some people might have traditions that aren't relative to you and I, two white guys, bringing this to the table. It's like, yeah, that's of course welcome.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about bringing in meaning, and that is done through the element of choice. I mean, ceremony becomes what it is, having any depth, because essentially you say it does. Like that's all. It's this acknowledgement that this is a deeper experience or something supernatural about it,
Mm.
and you make it so by choosing that.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of it would just be this apathy of just walking into the experience and being like, I don't know. I don't even know why I'm here. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I want this to be ordinary, so I'm not even going to bring anything extraordinary to it.
Mm-hmm.
You might get your ass handed to you, but it's also like, I think for me, the reverence comes from just humbleness of
Right.
being through the fire where it's like, I see, I see, I see. And that only has to happen hopefully once, a long time ago, maybe twice. But I do think this is a really interesting conversation. You're a bit unusual from your own interests and predilections, but you're right. The medical model is so intentionally secular. I mean, science is to a point, right? They don't want to be deluded by something they feel they can't measure in that way. And so now when we bring something, it is so deeply psycho-spiritual and personal and vulnerable, and we bring that into a medicalized model, it's not wanting or talking about something it doesn't really have any language for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And music's a great example because that's not something that's very difficult. It's very difficult to measure. So they're just like, how do we study which music? There's infinite kinds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is part of the vanguard of
Mm-hmm.
a lot of this work. And I can't imagine there are a whole lot of clinics such as yourself that are doing it in like a very professional way, very commercialized way, but still thinking about these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are very few now. I think that's going to change. For example, through these kind of conversations and podcasts, through your music getting out there further and wider, Pranongi and Amani, John Hopkins, there's some amazing music that's now being more and more widely available. And the clients themselves will demand it. And if the clinics don't offer it, then they'll be required to after a while because the clients themselves will start knowing that that's available and they'll start demanding it themselves.
Yeah. And you're finding that 1 hour is enough for you, huh? Imagine door to door when they come in, leave, it's longer than that. Or what do they do when they're coming down? Because some people have longer experiences.
Yeah, our sessions, our entire CAP session is 2 hours.
Okay.
So person comes in, if I'm just getting to know them, then I've already had a session to kind of open up their history and get into the deeper waters and make sure that they're a good candidate. And then if they're coming in for their first treatment session with CAP, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, then we oftentimes spend the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes catching up, setting intentions, asking how they're feeling, any hesitancies, excitement, dreams, energy coming into the space. The ceremony starts as soon as we say yes. It doesn't start as soon as I offer the ketamine or we are in circle and we drink the tea. It's already in motion. So I get curious, like what's already rising, take a little bit of a temperature of their inner landscape and then offer the medicine. And at that point we start the music, and that music track is an hour. Mm-hmm. And then we've typically got another 20, 30 minutes on the other side of that to harvest.
Yep.
And sometimes people are just in the zone and so deep and so insulated, and that's just amazing. And I'll let them stay there. And if it feels like they're trying to put words to something in order to fill the void, so to speak, then I'll ask them to just be with the process and let it continue to seep.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people are just so wonderfully awake. We've had this experience. We're just all of a sudden insights. Well, I got to share this. Help I know you're here to help work as my auxiliary memory bank. So let me just download everything that I just experienced and have you auto, you know, dictate, so to speak, or auto scribe what my internal experience just was or is. So now I can help them harvest some of the nuggets. And then that typically takes us to the 2 hour point. And then we have the client go to an integration room with a journal. We have a tea and tonic bar. So we have a cup of tea. They've got some downtime. And then we've also got a lot of other stations, right? We have a sauna. We have, which is kind of nice to do a light sauna on the side of just like continuing to open the experience. We have a suite of massage chairs. And then about an hour after the cap session, they'll do a float.
Nice.
And
that's quite the 1, 2, 3. I like that.
It's a pretty sweet stack. And to see people on the other side, and that's about a 4-hour process, right? Because we have 2 hours in the cap, an hour of integration while they're still landing, and then an hour in the float tank. And it's amazing to see how much can transform in just a 4-hour process.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, you know, probably one of the reasons we're largely talking about ketamine is because it's legal to use, and it's not a new thing to be legal, but it is meeting the moment of the interest and this transitionary space we're in as a society, civilization, and this is just a tool we have right now. But as we spoke about, these other tools that have been around on the underground are probably coming more and more online, such as MDMA therapy and psilocybin, and many people have been working with ayahuasca in the underground. How are you feeling that this process has unique advantages or disadvantages as it compares to MDMA therapy or psilocybin? And of course, this relates to your book, which I have right here, A Dose of Hope. So we're kind of talking about it, but we can get into specifics. But I'm kind of alluding to, you wrote a whole book about MDMA therapy, and we're talking about ketamine therapy. So, I mean, we could just start with like, why the difference?
Yeah.
And this is obviously the MDMA therapy is clearly important to you. I mean, you say right in the beginning, you feel like it has a lot of promise to be a big therapy, but we're doing ketamine therapy right now a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how I kind of got into this situation, and I didn't expect to get into this work when I went to med school or even through all of my residencies and fellowships. I didn't expect psychedelic therapy just kind of happened. About 15 years ago, I was introduced to ayahuasca, and it was the first time my brain had turned on, like to what I experienced at its more full capacity. And I learned more about.
May I ask? Excuse me. May I ask, like, where that experience was roughly? Was that what kind of modality it was in, the ayahuasca?
You mean like an underground community, local?
Yeah, like what did you do overseas? Was it Peruvian or was it Daime, or was it just someone who?
It was Shipibo, Quechua Lamista, in an underground community in Oregon about 15 years ago.
Okay.
And man, the Icaros just sank into my being and just opened me up like a flower. And I learned more about myself in 1 weekend with Aya than I had in 1 decade of psychotherapy.
You hear that a lot? Yeah. Yeah.
And I was sold. I was just freaking sold. I was so excited about what I had just experienced. And I was also a bit pissed off because nothing in my medical training had ever talked about this being a potential therapeutic. And in fact, we had bastardized and demonized all psychedelic states. And so I closed up my clinic, moved down to the jungle. I lived in an ashram for a couple of years, just kind of prepping for moving down to the jungle, and lived there for a year in essentially ayahuasca apprenticeship. I didn't really have a desire to do anything with it. I just really wanted to study. I wanted to study the medicine. I wanted to study the culture. I wanted to study the experience of how the Icaros are laced into the experience, and how the maestros and maestras understand which medicines to prescribe for a particular constitution to support people in the dietas. I mean, it was like this whole, it was the first time. So I had all my medical training was studying the brain and the later parts of the mind, because I got into more transpersonal psychology. But once I was introduced to psychedelic therapy, it was a study of the soul, and the whole soul science opened up, and it was amazing to be in touch with. And I didn't think I was going to come back. I didn't want to come back. But after about a year and my last couple of dietas, it was clear that, my dharma was to be, part of a bridge, so to speak, into the future of medicine as we starting to see it unfold now. And so I was really sold on Aya, and I worked with Aya for 8 years before anything else. And I was hardcore. I was raw vegan, Buddhist. It was back then. I was like, dissociative synthetic anesthetics. Why would I ever do that? And as I mentioned in the foreword to A Dose of Hope, and then my sister committed suicide. And I didn't see that coming, and we didn't see that coming. It just kind of happened out of the fucking blue. And if I had known then what I know now, and if there would have been warning signs that we were, paying attention to, or even not, because I knew she had a long history of alcohol dependence related to depression, but more related to her PTSD. And she had done everything: AA, psychopharmaceuticals, years of psychotherapy, all the things in the Western standard of care. And it still wasn't good enough. And something like MDMA therapy, which is just so freaking good for PTSD, wasn't even available back then. And it's not still widely available now. It's close. It's much closer than it's ever been. We still have more to do. So MDMA, I wanted to understand what that was about. And so I started researching that, and that eventually turned into the book. Along with my co-author, we really wanted to let the average person know who's going through PTSD experience that there is hope. There are tools. They are becoming available. Like, hold on, we're almost there. And unfortunately, not everybody's going to be able to work with ayahuasca. Not everybody's ready for Aya. And there's not enough Aya to go around, to just be clear.
Yeah.
There is enough MDMA because it's a synthetic. We can produce it in a lab. We can ensure purity and potency. Psilocybin, very easy to grow. So these two, along with ketamine, this is a sustainable model. But you get into Aya, San Pedro, peyote, iboga, 5-MeO-DMT from the Sonoran Desert Toad. These are scarce resources, and it's up to us to steward them well. So there's a part of the dialectic and a part of the dance right there is, how do we offer medicines to those that are ready, and how do we help people become ready? How do we help them effectively transition off of psychopharmaceuticals in order to work with medicines? Ketamine is very safe. You can use it without people having to be off of their pharmaceuticals. And so I got more into MDMA and the other medicines. Ketamine I only got into actually relatively recent, about 3.5 years ago.
Yep.
And I had already written the concussion repair manual, and I had already done a lot of research and been in the lab healing half a dozen really bad concussions of my own. And that got me into the neuro side of things. And then I was medically directing a TBI, a traumatic brain injury recovery center in Denver, Boulder area. And we started working with ketamine. And it was amazing to see people come in to a TBI center who had a lot of PTSD and recover both neurologically and psychologically with the use of ketamine. We were using a lot of other neurotherapeutics as well, for sure. But it was notable to see the improvement neurologically with ketamine because it helps to decrease the neuroinflammation that happens after injury. So that just got me really curious. Like, okay, what else do I not know? What else have I just been prejudiced against and kind of making wrong because I was up on my high
rabbit
horse.
hole. Yeah.
Totally. So I just started opening up the landscape in greater curiosity. Now I feel like I'm more curious than ever because I've been kind of righteously connected to a few things that I thought were the saving grace and the end all be all. And I made, as a result of that prejudice, I made other things wrong that now I'm starting to appreciate also have their place. So I just see now like every medicine has its sacred place at the table, and it's just up to us to understand how to use them.
Yeah, for sure. One quick question. When you decided to close your practice and move down to the jungle, did you wait like a couple weeks, or were you one of those people who like did ayahuasca got a big tattoo on your chest. And you're like, I'm quitting my life. And everyone's like, oh no. I mean, it worked out for you, but I
Yeah.
always tell people, wait 3 weeks before you get a tattoo.
Please
Yeah.
wait 3 weeks. Yeah. How about like, let's start with a Sharpie.
Yeah, right.
Draw
If you
on your
like it
skin
and you
what
still
you
think it's
think you
cool in
want.
3 weeks, yeah.
And if 3
Nothing on
weeks
the
goes
face,
by
yeah.
and you still like it, then get it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, you must I mean, I know I can sympathize because like I went through a lot of changes too 15 years ago, but it was psilocybin. Actually, it was ayahuasca too, but psilocybin's the thing that well, it was all of it. It's all of life, but sometimes it meets the moment in your life where doors are opening and they can open wider and you can choose to step through them or not. And it's all part of our journey. You know, like everybody graduates, so to speak. And um, it's just what's interesting about right now is that time does feel quite precious in the moment of where we're at. Like we can't just keep on keeping on. Eh,
Totally.
That's agreed upon. We know that much. But it's like, well, how do we change? And there's a feeling of despair that it's not going to change or it's impossible. We have no influence on these systems anyway. So what is the point?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to recognize the fundamental truth that all change, global change, comes from one individual at a time. It's the only way everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
So, in one level, there's nothing more important than your inner work and how then it relates into your life and being simpatico with the world. But it can be hard to convince us of that when the story that we're told essentially is the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of work and psychedelic work, I mean, I think when you're in those spaces where you really start to feel the oneness and the connection, it's so laid bare that,
Mm-hmm.
well, these choices I'm facing right in this moment have cosmic significance. And that sounds ridiculous when I say it to someone just listening, but it's it's true. You know,
Totally.
so it is really important work, and you talk about this in the book. Just let's talk about trauma, for instance, and PTSD. Like, do you think that everyone on various levels is dealing with PTSD or trauma?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's define then what that means to you and unpack that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. The reason for me, it's easy to say yes without a whole lot of, thought and consideration is that we're all part of a global system and we all come from traumatized lineages. So even in the narrow spectrum of the individual experience in this one body, if I didn't have the experience of childhood neglect, abuse, despair, etc., if I was raised in a phenomenally amazing home environment with very wise and mature parents, I would still get bumped and bruised, I hope. That's part of life. That's how we grow. And say all of that was just subthreshold enough that it didn't necessarily express itself as anxiety, depression, lack of security in my attachments, emotional dysregulation. I mean, there's a lot of different like metrics that we can use to say, okay, maybe that's trauma related. Maybe I'm fairly well put together. Maybe my life is pretty good. I'm pretty well identified with my small self and my larger self and my community at large and all that. Let's say all that's intact. Well, great. Okay, so that might mean that I'm a little bit more emotionally and psychologically resourced and available to do the greater work in the world. Awesome. We need servants for the greater good for sure, and we will for a while. But let's also look around because your points are really good one. Time is freaking precious now. We've never had the opportunity to self-annihilate as quickly and globally and catastrophically as we do now.
Yeah, it's kind of happening, right? It's like we're in a process of
We are the frog and the water is boiling.
yeah.
Right? This isn't just jacuzzi time. This is like all hands on deck, kind of red alert time, at least orange. And so if we just look around at our effect on the planet, species die off, the challenge in our physical, if we just look at it hardware, side of things. Like, okay, physicality is looking a bit grim. Ocean acidification, global climate change, la, la, la. Then let's look at it. If I'm working with a new client, we always talk about these 4 arenas: body, mind, heart, and soul. So let's do that kind of like just reflection at a global level in the family of humanity and on the planet. The family of humanity, the hardware, the physicality is a little bit strained. In many ways, we have more access to medical longevity than we've ever had. We have our kind of life expectancy has peaked a little bit. It was increasing pretty steadily, and with the opiate epidemic, that's kind of leveled off. It's even taken just a nudge tick down, but it's significantly better than it was. So we've started in many ways to understand this regenerative medicine paradigm, and yet we have this orientation to anti-aging medicine. Like, we've made aging bad, and we've made nature bad, and it's this war on nature. Everything from glyphosate on all of the crops to trying the best that we know how to do to hold on to our youth because we're scared of death. And when we look around at our old people, they go to nursing homes and just kind of wither away. So there's a lot that's distorted in the physicality arena. That's fairly easy to point to. But when we look at the mental and the emotional arena, there's a mountain of trauma. There's a mountain of division and polarization. And it's a more polarizing time than I've ever experienced in this lifetime.
You're connecting the polarization in society to trauma?
Totally.
You think there's a root there?
I think there's a root there.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm.
And it's a time where there's this global quickening happening. And depending on the level at which we're looking at, if we're just looking at it in this one life level, like, oh yeah, it could be really freaking grim. If we're looking at it from a meta perspective, then perhaps this is exactly what we came to be a part of. Perhaps this is exactly the cycle of the 26,000 year procession, like Sri Yukteswar talks to Yogananda in the tail end of Autobiography of a Yogi. We go through these cyclical patterns, these spherical patterns, these evolutionary patterns on these grand time scales, not just daily time and annual time and Gregorian time, but these meta cycles. And so maybe this is just part of that meta cycle that we need to go through in order to reclaim our divinity individually and collectively. And then as we do that, it's just like the most amazing times in all the epic stories where in the hero and the heroine's journey, you're not sure that they're going to make it out. And that's what makes it such a compelling story. Like, we're not sure that we're going to make it out of this pickle. And maybe we do, but maybe we don't. And maybe that's part of what we've come to be engaged in and actually come to be a part of, like to do our part, to play the best role that we know how to play. Because we all life is as important. Everybody has a singular important role in a unique blueprint and dharma. We've come to be a part of this magnificently dynamic time in human history. And so that trauma, there's so much trauma, First Nations people and the trauma in North America, the United States and Canada, it's similar to the First Nations people and the trauma in Australia or in indigenous cultures in Central and South America. The degree of cultural trauma that hasn't been addressed is still a deep wound in the collective psyche. That's part of this polarization, because that transgenerational patterning has still yet to be resolved. And we don't take enough ownership to help clean up the atrocities that have happened over the last 7 generations, nor do we have the responsibility to make sure that our actions today are in respect to the future 7 generations. It's a very adolescent culture that we live in. And so these medicines are part of what is allowing us to step aside of the ego, me, mine, and I kind of orientation. Like Einstein said, you can't solve a problem using the same mindset that created it. So these medicines allow a different mindset to briefly come in, perhaps engage the Satori moment so we can see more of our unity and how everything is so intricately related. I just started reading Joanna Macy recently, and she's just a fucking legend, because she brings together these systems theories along with like Buddhist dependent co-arising, like everything, or like Charles Eisenstein would talk about the state of inner being, or Thich Nhat Hanh. We're all talking about the same thing. Like everything is connected. This is the one place we all call home, this water rock called planet Earth. And when we throw something away from our house, it doesn't go away. It just conveniently goes out of our sight. And so,
well, then, Dr. Dan, if I can't see it, then it's not my problem. Everybody knows that.
Exactly the degree of responsibility that I think these medicines are starting to help us wake up to. And so, to your point, part of that includes like the reclamation of our own trauma and our own insensitivity to others, and the forgetting of that interconnectedness.
Yeah.
And so if we can just, depending on your definition and my definition, everybody's definition of trauma, if we can just recognize that there's so many atrocities that we haven't brought in current, and there's a lot of reclamation in order to make a better path forward for the generations to come, then we can call it trauma or not. Let's just call it something, but something is in the midst of a massive movement of healing.
It's like there's a baton in our hands that's been passed from all these generations before us. All the choices that have been made, generation upon generation. And it's only able to be dealt with, transmutated in the incarnate world. And here we are in it. And then it will be others after us. But that is a really beautiful opportunity. There's nobility in that. There's honor in saying, well, here I am alive. I'm the one who has the chance to not just be working on my own shit, but it's like how those tentacles go all the way out across time, and behind time and in front of time, so to speak. I can't prove any of this, but that's like what I feel. Like I feel this to be true. But that's what makes it so sacred about being alive. Why it's so precious. Not just because it's interesting or like all these resources have gone into making you, and all the resources you've used. Sure, that's all true. But it's to say like all of our ancestors can be rooting for us because it's saying like you have the baton in your hand and this is your time. And it's not just about how that affects you. It's like us being all of us. It's affecting us. So it makes it especially interesting. One other thought, it's just random. You were talking about, these sort of collapse we're in, but it also feels like it's the beginning stages of this renewal of like burning the fields. And you look back at the 2012 prophecies, and it sounds like you were on a similar timeline to me. If it was 15 years ago, so you were probably well aware of all that and deeply in that. And everyone was very sure. I'm sure there's a part of you that was hopeful. Is like, maybe this is it. Maybe it will be like it just flips a switch and it's a whole new energy. But now it seems more like, no, all that stuff was very true, but we're talking about galactic time, like generations. We're just moving through it, and we're still just like gotta burn all this shit out because this other thing's like coming up that truly is this new Baktun. But it could be decades as it's slowly transitioning, which is a very fast thing in a cosmological scale.
Totally.
But it kind of feels like all that shit is true. It is like everything's collapsing because it's no longer part of the cycle anymore. And it feels like there's this destiny, this concrescence pulling us forward of inevitability that is somehow woven in with our choice. It's a paradox, but it also feels like destiny and choice living together. And that's why like these opportunities we face, with these sorts of therapies or whatever it is you're feeling is your edge of your own growth. It's valuable, it's almost more valuable now or more beautiful, I should say.
Yeah. Like the playing field is ripening. The opportunities are ripening and the consequences are ripening. Like everything's just getting a little bit more alive, intense. Yes. Exciting. Yes. Anxiety provoking. Yes. Anxiety and excitement, they're pretty much the same hormonally and neurologically. It's just our mind and how we engage it. Like if I'm on the top of the roller coaster, I'm either going to freak out or I'm going to get really excited. So it's like our mindset and the orientation to engage in. I think what you said is beautiful in that it is this grand phase shift, and cosmologically, it's that fast. We're talking about billions of years that the Earth's evolved. hundreds of thousands of years that we've evolved. So this cosmological shift is actually happening fairly fast.
Yeah.
Even if it started with the harmonic convergence in 87 and then went through the Mayan portal and this Quetzalcoatl time in 2012, and now it was just 2 days ago, 2222 of 20,022. You know, it's like there's always
Gregorian.
these little nuggets that we can point to. And I do think that we are all feeling like this is a fucking important time. And maybe we've always felt like that. Maybe it was a really important time at these other cardinal moments, but the consequences have never been as extreme.
Yeah. Yeah, it's saying like you're needed now.
Right.
You know, taking a back seat and being completely passive about it, or not engaged, that's what's a problem. You know, the hypnotization from social media and the corporate messages we receive is like, just be part of the system and do that, you know, just keep buying the thing. Everything's okay. Nothing to see here. Although they like to fetishize the fear as well.
For sure.
It makes money. They know it engages our animal body to keep watching, and your attention is your currency right now. So it's like the more you can stay on the platforms, I mean, it's a sick cycle.
Absolutely.
That's the thing that's worth money, but that's the thing that's just totally like sugar. You know, it's not good for us, and it's hard for us to stop.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's so hard to stop. It usually takes a crisis to stop an addiction.
Yeah.
And
the world's going through a crisis, many crises.
Totally.
So it's like maybe one of these divorces or bankruptcies or NDEs will do the trick. I thought it'd be COVID. It didn't, you know.
Right.
We missed that one.
Yeah, I know.
But it's like
it kind of feels almost very unfortunate that we may have missed the opportunity to use a good crisis.
I mean, you couldn't make it. I guess you could have made it better by making it really bad. But it wasn't. I don't want to say it wasn't that bad. But I mean, like, I'm just saying the fact that something that affects every single person essentially on the planet. It seems like that's obvious. How could you not be like, oh my God, we're literally all one. Literally, my choices could have quite a literal butterfly effect of an actual virus, not like some cosmic thought or energy. It's like, no, it's just real. And we couldn't even do that. We couldn't do it.
This is a real freaking thing. Everybody on the planet has been affected. Or
isn't that crazy?
99%.
Thought about it quite a bit, probably changed their life. Yeah, I mean, that is just wild.
Absolutely wild. So we just had something that affected the entire planet simultaneously.
Still is. I mean, yeah.
And the consequences have never been higher. The death rate, from my understanding, hasn't really changed. So if we're talking about like the potential catastrophe of a global pandemic, if this is what we're choosing to describe it as a relatively mild global pandemic and what could have happened.
Yeah, right? It could have been kids dying, bleeding out of their eyes. I mean, horrific.
Right. And so if this is an opportunity to have a slowdown, a reflection time, how are we living in alignment and in respect to one another, this family of humanity, in respect to all the other species, in respect to this global place we call home, in respect to the past 7 generations, even before, and into the coming generations, and who's going to clean up our mess when we're leaving. We had a grand opportunity to slow things down and do things different, and we haven't really done much different globally and collectively at this point.
To be fair, I agree. At the same time, though, I'm sure you know many people, I do, myself included, it did change a lot of my habits. It did slow me down. It did force me to stop touring. It did change a lot of things in my life. My partner's studio closing. I mean, I think in some ways it probably has, well, of course it's had a big effect on the world, but it's going to be a while till we see how that pans out. I mean, I do think some of the interest just in psychedelic therapy as an example is a symptom of that emergence. It's the emergency that is coming into people's lives in different ways. And so I do think even if we miss the collective opportunities with the pandemic, on an individual level, no one really escaped. As you said, it hit them and it created pressure on their life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we start to get more of those crises on a higher level than maybe they were going to happen. And that happened for a lot of people in their own unique way.
Totally.
A lot of people. And that forced change, whether they liked it or not. And a lot of that was shitty. But for some people, it's led to like some insights.
100%. I think you're totally accurate there. And it certainly did change my life. It changed a lot of people in my kind of communities. I kind of still think in many ways I live in a bit of a bubble.
Yeah.
And so we're paying this is not an elitist comment by any means. So let me see if I can make it just super neutral. I don't get the sense that a lot has changed collectively and globally in the conversation of like a more sustainable life and a harmonious collective that we know could happen and may be forced to happen through, as you're describing, potential future crises. And then we can look back at this and be like, oh, maybe this was one of those whispers at the door or a knock at the door before somebody has to bang on the door and then bust the door down because there's a fire in my house and I'm not paying attention to it.
Yeah. I still believe because, you know, I was in New York on 9/11 and I saw firsthand how it changed everyone in a really positive way. And I saw that, and that wasn't that long ago. And just, I think it just has to be maybe the right thing. I mean, that was really black and white. I mean, you could see it, you could smell it. It's there, it's gone. Versus something like this it almost was invisible sometimes for a lot of people. It was more like an idea, even so, or turned into that. Anyway, we could, you know how these holes go. We could go down a COVID hole.
Totally.
So as we round this out, as people are interested in this work, a lot of people want to do work or are doing work on their own. What do you think the pitfalls of that might be, or anything you might like to say about that?
Yeah, it's a bit like doing surgery on yourself. You know, it can happen. That the dude in Canyonlands,
there's
I think
YouTube.
it was.
You can probably do any surgery now on
video.
YouTube. Yeah.
If I'm stuck in Canyonlands with a boulder on my arm, I can figure out how to saw it off and find you know the local EMS and put me back together. Or if I'm a Rambo and I fall out of a 100-foot cliff and into a tree and I can sew up my arm again, like we have we're capable of a lot. And so if that's all I had to do, that's all I had the opportunity to do, those were my only options, I'd say, okay, great. Let's build out your bug out bag. Let's get you prepped. Make sure you're set up for a positive experience. Like if you're on psychotropic medications, psychiatric medications, don't do things that are going to be contraindicated. If you have a contraindication to any one of these substances and plants or synthetics, then don't do it or have a lot of caution. I mean, there's ways to prep people. And then if you need an online preparation program, an online integration program, maybe an online virtual community to help you integrate, great. Then maybe you've taken some of the blaring hazards off the list. All that being said, it takes a lot of skill and a pretty phenomenal amount of self-observation and neutrality to do our own deep soul work solo.
Yeah.
And it's also fascinating, to do that kind of work and to explore the edges, but to do that in a way that can help us, stay on the rails and not completely go off track. The biggest challenge where I've consistently seen, say all of that checklist had been taken care of and there's reasonable integration. The challenge that is actually rising even more and more, because I think people are becoming more and more sensitive to the trauma that might be underneath and asking the deeper questions, is when people think they're relatively put together and they go through an experience and they spontaneously recall their own trauma. And that's real disorienting and discombobulating. Now, they are going to have to try and put themselves back together and kind of reconfigure enough of an ego structure to get back into the day-to-day and maybe push that thing back into the corner or underneath the rug or, whoa, okay, I'm not quite ready to see that. kind of experience, and then just continue on until something else rises. That's this little whisper. Again, I get the sense that all of this medicine work is rising as an opportunity for us to come into a greater individual soul intelligence so that we can be in touch with a greater global soul intelligence. And we know that surgery always goes better when you have somebody working on your behalf. It's also the same reason, like, I typically am not the best therapist for my family. I would refer
You don't
out
say.
to
Yeah.
that. Because I don't have that as much neutrality. It's the same thing for facilitation. So am I a proponent of self-exploration? For sure. Do I think everybody's up for that? No. Do I think there are ways that most people who are not up for that yet could be trained? Yes. That's part of our opportunity. But to do the deeper aspects of soul reweaving and integration, in my experience, takes the support of a facilitator, but not just any facilitator, somebody who's really trained in what we might call soul-centered medicine, or the awareness of being trauma-informed, multi-level kind of perspectives of where those trauma lines reside and how to track those trauma threads back to their core, and not work on behalf of rescuing the client that they're working on behalf of. It's more like helping them find their own parts, give them voice, help them come home, and then help them integrate. But the person is still doing the work themselves. They have to do the work, just like the butterfly has to squeeze out of the cocoon itself in order to be able to fly. And if it's rescued from the cocoon, it won't fly. We're all made of the same cosmic dust. So we have to go through that process ourselves. And it's a facilitator who knows when to intervene, when not to intervene, how to support that, how to frame it in a way that helps people move from victim to participant to student to teacher. And it's a progression of soul level development. And I think that's what's coming online more and more, particularly with the medicine path, but also just through these experiences in a variety of both altered states that we might talk about, like transcendent states, but also primal states, like awakening our animal nature and our experience with a permaculture, like reconfiguration, recognizing that not only are we all connected in this, earth plane and heart plane, but like also the primacy of where we come from, connected to our watersheds and our food sources, connected to the elementals that make all of these nutrients that we take into our body that is the substrate of our lives. Like when we do, that's for me more of a vertical process. Like MDMA is more of a horizontal medicine. But when you get into ayahuasca, which is a soul medicine, deep, psilocybin can be that way too. Ketamine, when used in the right way, can be that way. Deep, like deep into the aspect of our core being, deep into the aspect of the core of the earth, like where we come from. And then you have upper world medicines. Like that was a lower world process I just spoke about. And then you have upper world medicines. 5-MeO-DMT, classic upper world medicine, back to God, back to source. That's a vertical process. From source to earth, we bridge heaven and earth. MDMA and like San Pedro can be very much like this. Heart open, relationally connected, really looking around the horizon of the landscape, seeing how everything in this like middle world is intricately connected. So we have this like sophisticated taxonomy that's starting to build into a rubric that recognizes when we have a variety of different psychedelic therapies in our toolkit, then we're going to get better and better at understanding which medicine to use for which person at which time, to help essentially them collect and reconfigure the parts that have been disconnected from. And oftentimes, like you're describing, that's an uncomfortable process. And how do we lean into that, build resiliency? How do we have the faith to move through that process? Lean on the heroes like the Dalai Lama and Saint Teresa of Avila and Krishnamurti, or like whoever your heroes are that went through their own hell and back and came and said, okay, this might be a way that we can harmonize ourselves in the world again. Like we have to be able to reach out for those wisdom teachers and those elders and mentors. And I think that's a big fucking deficit too. And then I'll kind of end on this part of the rant and give you the talking stick back. I think we really need to reweave our relationship with our elders. We have, like Michael Meade talks about, we have a lot of olders, but we don't have a lot of elders. And we're seeing the escalating rise of dementia. And we're seeing the escalating need of these nursing homes to just kind of shut people away and let them die in obscurity. Well, we all need to contribute. And it's important to have the software experience of contribution, but also the neurologic cleanup that actually imbues a lot of this like neurological degeneration process. So one of the aspects that this whole transformational medicine kind of orientation is doing when we look at the hardware side of things, particularly the brain and body, and then we look at the software side of things, the mind, heart, and soul, we weave that together. I think we can actually we can get rid of the anti-aging movement, and we can actually celebrate aging. We can actually celebrate elderhood like the Maoris do. When we were in New Zealand, one of the Maori elders, mentors who was teaching us, she said, typically it would be the grandparents that raised the children because the parents were in their generative years and they were out kind of working, and it gave the grandparents something to do, and they were actually better parents because they'd already done it once. and it gave this connection between the youth and the elders. And so it was the most beautiful, full spectrum kind of whole cultural model that I had ever heard of. And it was so simple, yet it just made so much sense. So I think for all of what we're talking about in this, I too am optimistic. I too think it's going to get a little, there's going to be more crises to help us in that, global wake up. But with music, like you're putting out, with medicines, like you're becoming more widely available, with these kind of conversations, these longer term conversations, longer term platforms, we just slowly start to imbue some of this hope into the collective. Like, yeah, it's going to get crazy. Maybe it needs to get crazy so that we can all steer this ship back into a more sustainable trajectory. And then I think, okay, if that's happening, then maybe that's what we came to be a part of. We came to be a part of the change. Like, what's a more noble cause than that?
Last question. As you're stepping into the world of commerce and psychedelics, are you thinking about anything to do with access, or is that relevant to yourself as a business? Are these, and how are you trying to do that?
Highly relevant. So we're moving into group therapies as well. We're moving into what I would call an experiential educational model as well. So a lot of preparation, a lot of integration. We stack a lot of therapies around our ketamine process. So we need less ketamine therapies. And when people really come in ready, then they also need less ketamine therapies to get the same downstream effect. I just started a nonprofit called Thank You Life. And our mission is to work as a funding stream from donors to potential clients that wouldn't be able to afford services on their own for ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA. And then we work with other agencies as essentially like a matchmaker. So clients that want to receive services in a given demographic, how do we have centers there that have been vetted for excellence? And can we pair them and offer them scholarship? And it's not just a free scholarship. There's an application process. So we can start onboarding them to consider, okay, what gets to happen through this process of transformation that generates my give back. So the title of the nonprofit, Thank You Life, just came as I was consistently seeing people come out of a medicine experience and start to reclaim their life and say, like, wow, thank you for this life. I was disconnected from it before, and now I'm coming into gratitude for my life, and I want to pay it forward, and I want to help other people have that same experience. So those are a couple of ways. And then I think we are moving into an insurance model that's going to be supportive. And I think we're going to be collectively moving into a different medical model where we're going to see the benefit over time of these kind of therapies that are heads and tails above the standard of care in efficacy, and actually are not only performance generators for the people that go through that, like, they start to discharge and offload their depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, chronic pain, etc. They perform better in their place of employment. So we're, targeting small business owners in that regard. So not only are they performing better and they're happier, but it's also cost savings, because they're not using the same degree of psychopharmaceuticals, the same degree of hospitalizations or psychotherapy, like the same degree of medical services that have kept the current standard of care in operation. When we offer targeted therapies in this personal and transformational arena, we actually see the benefit downstream either matches the current standard of care and pricing, or it's significantly lower. And so when that happens, I think we're going to see a revolution in the entire healthcare industry, because healthcare, unfortunately, is driven by dollars. You have to just follow the money. And so when we can show efficacy and cost savings, well, then it's a no-brainer.
It's a bit of a challenge, though, because we're in a for-profit health insurance system that's incentivized to charge $400 for an aspirin, and so, I mean,
and that
it's
needs
not
to change
as simple
too.
as like, oh, it's cheaper. It's actually, that might not be a good thing. I mean, maybe one of the reasons, there's a whole argument there about like, if there's no
100%.
money to be made, they're not into it.
It's totally true, man. Our entire value structure as a medical industry needs to change. And that's not going to be a quick overhaul. But again, I do believe that the clients and the consumers can demand that. Because when we look at historical change, that's happened. It's been part of the revolution of starting like the electric car industry. People just being tired of using fossil fuels, or, essentially big oil. The entire organic food movement has really started from people just being tired of eating swag food that was laced with a bunch of herbicides and pesticides. So I think it can happen. I think we're on the early stages. But to your point, big medicine is the largest lobby in the political arena right now, much bigger than oil.
Yeah.
Agriculture's up there too, but big agriculture and big medicine are also tied together, because you have a lot of the same chemicals that are going into like antibiotics to kill off like some microbe internally, as well as pesticides that are killing all the microbes externally. So there's a lot of overlap there, and that is part of the reclamation that needs to happen.
No doubt. This was a great conversation. Thank you. Your book's called A Dose of Hope, and Kuya, right, is in Austin there. What else do you have going on? I'm guessing you have even more.
There's a fair bit. Yeah, there's a fair bit happening. And first of all, just let me say also, thank you, East Force, for having me on. I always appreciate the conversations.
Yeah.
Appreciate the music that you're putting out in the world. And I'm excited. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm really optimistic. So Kuya's happening. Thank You Life is happening. Dose of Hope's happening. Full Spectrum Medicine is a psychedelic integration platform that I put together over the last few years. It's free to the public. I just wanted people to have good, clean information, because a lot of people were just kind of floundering after medicine experiences. We've got a few things also cooking in the hopper, but I want to save some for next time we talk, as I hope there's going to be a next time. And let me know when Austin's in your orbit again, and I'd love to have you over to Kuya and show you what it's about.
Absolutely. We'll get out there again sometime. Love it out there. Lots of friends there now. So, and it's the center of the universe. Now it's the spot. So
it's certainly become this kind of.
I'm being counterculture by not moving there.
Good. Hold strong. I want to come visit you in Boise. I love Boise. I love Idaho. I love those mountains.
Yeah, you're welcome to come, but it's going to be the next thing.
I know.
So
keep it quiet.
Be careful. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's our cat's out of the bag. Apparently, it's the fastest growing city in America, but
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah, it's still quite small. So, I mean, it's just not a very big place.
Yeah, like Boulder was 30 years ago.
Yeah. But I'm here because Radha's here, and then I built this studio out of her old garage to have a place to work, and it's turned into quite a nice little spot to make music and be all day.
I'm digging it. It's got a good vibe back there.
It's quite bright. Yeah, I built all these windows up here. So it's got above me, so where it doesn't reflect them. I've got all these windows, and I just have natural light all day long. It's usually pretty sunny here. And,
Boulder's got, Boise has good Good sun. It's
Yeah.
like Colorado. I mean, you get close to 300 sunny days a year.
Probably. I think they have a bit of an aversion in the winter, but dude, I grew up in Oregon and you were in Portland. You know, there's no comparison. I mean,
Nada.
none. I mean, if that's your like thing to compare it to, this is just, way more sun. And I live on the sun, so I need it.
Yeah.
I need it.
Awesome, brother.
Well, thank you. Good fortune to you, and look forward to talking again.
Absolutely, man. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Dan, for coming back on the show. It's always fun to talk, and I look forward to seeing you out there in Austin. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Could, but it's the live version, and it's from the new EP Live in Brooklyn that just came out. There's 4 tracks that we recorded with new string arrangements by Lorna Doone. And it was a fun challenge. It was definitely a challenge, but getting to do all these things like in the live, taking it from the studio setting and trying to translate it into a trio of strings and then performing it live and recording it. You know, every time we were in a studio, I think on Shoal Street in Brooklyn, and every time like some car went by playing reggaeton or loud music or some big motorcycle, you could hear it in the recording. We had to work around it. And that was a bit tough because we were kind of short on time out of the gate. But I hope you enjoy this new recording. More things to come. I am planning a little release that starts on Piano Day, which is March 29th, I think, or 26th. It's the 88th day of the year. It's a holiday that was started by Nils Fromm, and I'll be joining in this year as I begin to release an album starting on that date. But until then, thank you all for the support, the reviews, and the emails, and the hellos, especially everyone who came out to the shows in Las Vegas and Arizona. It was really wonderful to see you, and really, really heartwarming to do, especially the Las Vegas. That was doing a big ceremony concert like that, and having our friend David Lobser come out to do the visuals. Super awesome, and a really potent event for me. So thank you. Until then, keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, my friends, do it with grace.